whatever they think it will suit them from it, as we use materials from other side. But the bottom line is that it should meet the standards of our institution and our belief system. Anything, even if you do research, anything that do not comply with that particular golden rule should never be used, because it's going to sow confusion. So that's what we are doing at the moment. It should be in line with the teachings of the church as the prophet has commanded us. So we'll go on. This is the book of Kings. I've made a little research, and it's not long because it's introduction. It's just like how I introduced the book of Kings. From there, we will take it from there. We can go to the next slide, please. Well, I know that a lot of us think that during biblical times, the children of Israel were just a spiritual entity who just go about strictly as one. They have one way of life, like dedication to worship God and religion, and nothing else mattered to them. But that's not necessarily true. They were just like all other people in their surrounding who came before or after them. It is true that their lives were centered around religion, but they had other ambitions too. And just like modern societies, whereby we take interest as to who rules us and what's their ambition and goal about the people or country that they are leading, biblical Israelites, as well as other nations in those days, heavily invested their emotions and energies, as well as their time, on such political matters. And in actual fact, the era of kings in Israel came through a popular demand, and before that, there was no specific household that was granted the power to govern the entire nation. This was a unique setup because surrounding nations were ruled by monarchs. But in Israel, if ever there was a need for a charismatic leader to be installed, God himself would choose a suitable candidate for a particular time with a specific mission. And after the person in question had fulfilled their respective sacred mission, again, in God's own appointed time, someone else would be chosen to fulfill another different mission. Well, in a nutshell, before the era of kings, no one had an absolute rule over Israel but God. This kind of system was called theocracy, or the rule of God. And for over 300 years, judges were assigned with the task of ruling Israel. So each judge would come and execute whatever role given to them by God, and when they were done, they would just retire and subsequently pass away, because theirs was not a permanent occupation. However, things changed drastically when the children of Israel demanded to have their own monarch, just like everyone else around them. The last judge, Prophet Samuel, tried to reason with them, but unfortunately, they had already made up their minds. So God subsequently relented and granted them their will, and thus started the era of kings. Slide by slide, before I even go further, is there anything that we missed? Are there any questions with regards to that slide? Because it's just a preface written by me. I didn't take anything from anyone, just it's my knowledge of this, and that's how I introduce the whole thing, so that someone should understand. So if there's someone who wants, I want it to be interactive. It can be in the end or now, but other times it's better when someone raises their hand and asks questions immediately before we delve any further with the subject matter. So if there are no questions, then we can go ahead. I hope we all understood that. Well, what General, we all one question. A question.
Yes. Go ahead, General. All ahead, scholars.
Yes.
Just going back to the slide before, General, you were saying that God appointed people for at an appointed time for a specific role or specific mission. So it means in the times of judges, the judge would rule until that specific mission was done, and then another one could take over after that. Unlike kings, where they waited for them to die, and then another one took over. Just checking that.
Yes, exactly that. Because if you remember quite well, when we were dealing with the book of Judges, it would be God who chooses a judge. Whether it's your Deborah or your Barak or your Ehud or your Samson or your Gideon, they would execute whatever mission given to them by God, and when they were done, they were done. Theirs was not a permanent position, so to say. They just had to do whatever. If you remember, in the case of Jephthah, after winning that particular war, he went back to his estate. Never had time to rule over Israel. He only had the mission he had to fulfill was to defeat the nation of the Amorites. That was it, was done. Same applied to Gideon. And actually, if you read, you go to the book of Gideon, about Gideon, I think it's chapter 8 of Judges. They even tried to make him a king. He refused. He wanted, all he had to do was to redeem Israel from the hands of the Midianites. And thereafter, he went back to his estate and retired. That's how it is. No two ways about it. But however, kings were a permanent feature because we talk of here hereditary legitimacy. Hereditary legitimacy, it simply meant the government, we know, we like talking about the government being legitimate and stuff like, because it's there by the power of the vote. But hereditary legitimacy means you inherit, you are a legitimate ruler simply because you inherited the throne. So whether a king was a dunderhead or was evil or was, you are trapped with him for the duration of his life. And he will reign over you up until he dies. Whether he makes you to go into sin or he will point you to the Lord, that was something else. But he will reign up until he dies. And thereafter, another one would come. Usually it would be his son, because like I said, it's hereditary legitimacy. The son will inherit the throne, and it will make him the legitimate ruler of the kingdom. He will also do as he pleases. It was hoped that since they are a nation of God, they would abide and adhere by Mosaic law or the Torah, but most of them didn't. Maybe I'm really getting ahead of myself. We'll just go through that as we are introducing this book. But I hope it's understandable to everybody else. Did I answer your questions, Chorister Zanele?
I'm covered. Thank you, General.
All righty. Thanks. Moving along. So what's nice about the books of the Bible in the Old Testament, they follow a certain sequence. You see, it was Moses, later on it was Joshua, later on it was the Judges. The Judges now usher nicely the book of Kings. Obviously, I always tell everyone else that Samuel is the continuation of Judges because he was a judge himself. Like the book of Ruth, the book were also written during that particular era when Israel didn't have a monarch. This is a quotation from the book of Judges. In those days, there were no kings. You'll read that on your own. It's Judges chapter 21, verse 25. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. That paints the picture quite clearly. Judges were appointed, we have already touched that. Judges were appointed by God for a specific mission. And when the mission was accomplished, the judge would retire because theirs were not a permanent position. Judges reigned over Israel for a period of 300 years. Israel was a loose federation. Each and every tribe just did as they pleased. They had no one to rule over them. Time and again, God would speak to them through a prophet whenever there was a need. The last judge was Prophet Samuel. In his old age, he appointed his two sons, Joel and Abiah. Please, when you see this name Joel, do not think that is Prophet Joel. This was the son of Prophet Samuel. Don't confuse the two. These are two different characters. So Samuel had two sons, that was Joel and Abiah. He handed over to them so that they should take over from him. But unfortunately, this pair was corrupt and the nation rejected them. You will read the book of Samuel. They told him that, you see, you're an upright man, but your sons are not like you. They take bribery, and then they look at who's rich and who's not, and they would usually make sure that they distort judgment according to the stature of a person in the community. So we really do not want them. You did a good job, but not your sons are not like you. This was a replica of what Samuel saw before, because when he was in the house of Eli, the old man Eli was a righteous man, but the sons were corrupt. So this was history repeating itself. Samuel was upright, but Joel and Abiah were very corrupt. So there was always an outside threat from other neighboring nations, especially the Philistines. So Israel demanded a strong and permanent leader to head a central government. They demanded to have a monarchy just like other nations around them. You see, there's this thing about people who believe in God. We hate being the odd ones out. Israel had a unique system. There were no taxations. They lived according to the law of God, and nobody oppressed them. Nobody wanted anything for them. They were not even forced to join the army. You'll read that whole thing when Samuel was explaining to them the disadvantages of a king. He told them that he will take your sons to work on his field, some of them to be soldiers, some of them to do manual jobs. They said it's okay. We want that still, we don't care. Because if somebody had already made up their mind, there is no way that you can try and discourage them from whatever course of action they want to take. And this is exactly what happened during the times of the last days of Prophet Samuel. So the last judge was Samuel. There was always an outside threat. Yes, that kind of government, it's good to have a loose federation where the tribe of Judah reigns itself, the tribe of Naphtali rules itself, the tribe of God rules itself, the tribe of Levi rules itself. But it is, the nation is not cohesive. It's not together. So anyone, they raise volunteers whenever there's an outside threat, and they choose generals or whoever they would choose as their leader. They would go to war and come back, and they would go back to their respective vineyards and estates and stuff like that. So they felt it was not working out for them. They need a strong government. You can tell this was just a laissez-faire government. It was not, in the true sense of the word, it was not a central cohesive government. So they needed something strong, according to them. But according to God, it was okay. They were supposed to be like that. Nobody was supposed to be working for someone, and taxes was not supposed to be extracted from people to make someone to make someone's livelihood cozy at the expense of the whole nation. But the Israelites didn't want any of that. So God gave into their whims and subsequently granted them their demand. Thus started the era of kings. And unlike judges who came before them, the reign of kings was nothing but short of disaster. Any questions with regards to this? Even comments are very welcome, because I want it to be as engaging and memorable as possible. I know I'm a good storyteller, and some of you will feel that I've done a good job, but I would really love you to engage me, because I'm not good as far as monologues are concerned. I'm dealing with an audience which I think should be engaging me as well. But however, if you feel that I've done justice to the slide, we can go to the next one, because it's anyone who knows what I'm doing for a living. I present at most of the times to management and stuff like that. So I make sure usually that I'm prepared for the task that I'm given. So we're looking at the character of judges versus kings now. So unlike judges who came before them, the reign of kings was nothing short of disaster. Judges were driven by a desire to do the will of God and redeem Israel, and they all did exactly that in their time. And none of them ever deviated from their divine mission. Tell me of any judge who ever misled Israel, whether it's your Samson, whether it's your Deborah, whether it's your Gideon, your Ehud, your Barak. None of them ever deviated from God's plan, simply because they got directives from God and executed them exactly. But then that happened for 300 years. So it means for 300 years, even though Israel would at times deviate from God's will because the positions were temporal, as I've already indicated, but whenever God chooses a man to lead Israel or a woman, in the case of Deborah, they would do exactly as God had told them, just like Moses and Joshua who came before them. But the kings were totally different. Kings they led Israel into multitudes of abominable practices, which eventually led to the destruction of Israel. And most of them were evil and arrogant. And it's only a handful few who walked according to God's law. So eventually God was forced to do away with them. And that's when God led them to the Babylonian captivity. And when they came back after 70 years, we're still going to deal with Babylonian captivity when we deal with the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. I just want you to understand the Bible and the political environment. So when they went to Babylon, when they came back, they never had kings anymore. So God brought back something close to what they used to do in the beginning, because you had Ezra, who was the spiritual leader, a direct descendant of Aaron, but he never took that office simply because he was more concerned about other things than rewriting the genealogy. Remember, they stayed 70 years in Babylon. That's why Ezra is called Ezra the scribe. So he was writing the genealogy of everyone who came, who made it back to Israel, and even some of the books. For instance, he arranged the book of Psalms. He was more like Moses, because he was trying to turn back people to a proper worship of God. I mean, if you stayed 70 years in Babylon, there are a lot of things that would fall into the cracks. So it was the duty of Ezra to do that. So what I'm trying to say is that after the kings, God never wanted Israel to have kings anymore. Because you look at what happened to the northern kingdom. It went straight into idolatry from Jeroboam up until Hoshea. No king ever did what was right. The only king who tried, and I'm saying try because you read it on your own, when we are dealing with is King Jehu. Still, he was not an upright person. The only credit God gives him is because he destroyed the house of Jezebel, the house of Ahab. But other than that, he was also an idol worshiper. So you can tell that the king, you look in Judah or the southern kingdom, you'd have somebody like Ahaz, who even banned the children of Israel from worshiping their own God. A direct descendant of David, closing the temple, opening a temple of the Assyrian gods, even taking the pattern of the gods of Assyria, like the altars, bringing them to Assyria. For the 16 years he reigned, Israel was sinking deep into sin. So we still want to deal with these individual characters, but I'm just showing you, I'm trying to illustrate how sinful the kings were. Kings were different. They led Israel into multitude. I've already done that. So most of them were evil and arrogant, and it's only until eventually God was forced to do away with them. So after the kings, there were no other kings afterwards. They came back to Babylon. Nobody ruled over Israel, but it was just somebody like Nehemiah and Ezra going back to the original roots. Any questions?
Here's one, General. Church of God and Saints of Christ to, it's not a question though, to the Sabbath school scholars, all hail saints. Okay. No, I just want to pick on this, and maybe just like you, I'm too forward, and we're still gonna get there. If for 70 years Israel was in captivity, I'm combining both of them. I'm not talking about the northern and the southern. But for 70 years, they were in captivity. Chances are that what we think we know it's Jewish tradition today was diluted during the 70 years. And chances are that it's not as what it was before. Yeah. Am I right to think like that, or I'm wrong? Because as you mentioned, Ezra was trying, in as much as he wrote the genealogy, but he was also trying to take the people of God back into the word, as he in one of the chapters where he was reading to them the law and the commandment of God, he was trying to teach them back what is the right one. But what I want to pick on now is chances are that what we subscribe to, or what we see when we search about Jewish tradition, what we see, I mean, we will have to look at that as Sabbath school as well, where did the sect of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, when did all that start? Because when I read in the Old Testament, I don't remember Moses establishing such a sect, or people saying you are going to be Sadducees responsible for this, or Pharisees responsible for this, or holding a different view of the very same Torah that you are reading. Am I right to think that it was the 70 years that influenced the loss in the true tradition of what we as the Jews needed to hold on to?
Are you done?
I am done.
You are absolutely correct. The Talmud, I'm sure somebody who has ever studied Judaism, that's what we call Talmud. It was when you are in captivity, obviously, because some of the things that you used to know, you used to practice, bit by bit, they are fading away. And remember, Israel that went to captivity was no more Israel that was practicing God's law. Hence, they went into captivity. Most of them had already given themselves to idols. The whole nation, that is. You read the book of Jeremiah when he was talking to them, because had they subscribed to God's laws, there was no need for them to go into captivity. Captivity was a punishment for what they have done. So think of a nation that deviated from their own tradition, goes into captivity. And because they repented when they were in the foreign land, they tried to retrace their footsteps. Because remember what Jeremiah said to them, when I go to the highways and look and ask old people for the old ways. It means they had already lost when they were still in their homeland. How much more when they went into captivity now? Now, Judaism, or there was no religion called Judaism. Judaism is what you come across in the New Testament, and it's not called like that because it was not necessarily a religion of Jews. It was a religion of the entire Israel. So as time went by, because they were mixed up with other, it was called Judaism. There was no such thing called Judaism because anyway, Moses was not Jewish. He was from the tribe of Levi. So it can be that, it can be called the Levite rule or Judaism rule. It was the God's law. Those were God's law. Judaism is something totally different. It's how Jews who were in captivity decided the interpretation of the law. Let me just put it this way. It's another topic on its own, but it's quite essential that we handle it right away. In captivity, when they were trying to retrace their footsteps, they started to have what we call the rabbis. You go to the Old Testament, there's nothing called a rabbi. A rabbi is someone like you and me and Deacon and Deacon Jonah and whoever are knowledgeable would put them in a set up like a classroom where they were teaching them their own laws and their identity. Because obviously, when you are in Babylon, you do what the Babylonians do. So they did not want to lose their tradition. So whoever was knowledgeable was appointed to head the classes. And obviously, it totally depended because you didn't have, when you were taken away by Nebuchadnezzar, you didn't have the manuscripts and stuff like that. So whatever was in your mind, you teach the sect that's following you. The word rabbi means a teacher. I'm sure you all know that. So that's where the history of rabbinical Judaism started. Before, when they were still in Canaan land under the kings and they still had the temple. You remember when we were dealing with the book of Joshua and Numbers that there were 48 cities of Levites throughout Israel, whereby the Levites, because they were chosen priesthood of God, would administer, or rather the religious practices of Israel, whether sacrifices and all that. So once they leave or they are forcefully removed from their own land, they didn't have that luxury of Levites and all that. So they would need people who knew the law. Now, since there are no scripts, they would teach the law according to the way they understand it. Some of it, depending on the knowledge of the rabbi, who it would be mixed up with some Babylonian practices. And I'll give you this example. Anyone who tells you that the Jewish calendar is from God is not telling the truth. They inherited it from Babylon. I mean, if you stay 70 years in captivity, you have forgotten everything that's yours. So the discrepancy about the Babylonian calendar, which is so-called the Jewish calendar today, is that after 11 years, that's when you can have a leap year. And after that, you add, the leap year goes this way. Unlike the Gregorian calendar that we're using, they add an extra month. So there's a year when they have 13 months. Does that come from God? No. That was the way Babylonians used to do things. That particular month, you ask them, they call it Lunar Adar. So it shows you that there's so much of Babylonian practices that they inherited and took them and took it and made it part of the integral Judaism practices, which do not necessarily conform to Mosaic laws. And I'll come to the school of the different schools that you've spoken about. The Pharisees, the Zealots, who are not they hardly speak about them. That you have the Pharisees, the Zealots, and the Sadducees. Sadducees were from the priesthood, the Levites, most of them. They didn't believe in the resurrection of the dead. They didn't believe in angels. You see now, this is a religion, a pure religion is turned into philosophy now. It depends on as to who is driving a bigger sect, and it will be that particular sect will be influential. So that is why usually Pharisees and Sadducees agreed on certain things, but they disagreed on the resurrection of the dead as well as angels, right? And then you come to the Pharisees. Moses' law, you can write this down. It's something we're still going to deal with as time goes on. There were 633 laws, if I'm not mistaken, 630 something laws, 31 or 33 between those numbers. They added 100 more laws. That's why Jesus said, cursed are the Pharisees because they put more load on the people's, they put more burden on the people's back, and they can't live, which they can't even live to their own fingers. So Pharisees were added, out of that, it means you had 731 laws or 733 laws. They added onto that. All of that because of interpretation of the law, since they have lost what used to be theirs. So
all right. I don't want to take you away from your lesson. All I wanted to pick on was that what we are seeing now and what we are studying as in the era of Jesus, it is exactly what happened, that the so-called leaders of the church, just like the kings, they became corrupt and they became what God did not intend for them to. Just as the kings, compared to the judges, they became bigger than what they were supposed to be. Likewise, even your Levites or your church leaders also, they became bigger. They became bigger than the very thing that they were supposed to be teaching or learning from as well. So I just thank you for that. We will pick on that. We will make sure we make a lesson on that as well, so that we empower the youth and the church in understanding these things, because it's easier for young people to be tempted and think Judaism is fancy, but when they don't know what is the origin of this. So you can go ahead with your lesson. I wanted to just make that comparison, that judges and your, maybe let's say the so-called appointed rabbis after the 70 years, they became bigger than what they were supposed to say.
Yes, they deviated totally from the mission, because the whole point was to take the children of Israel back to their tradition and to Torah and to the proper way of worshiping God. But unfortunately, they became judges, they became everything. They would even sentence people to death. I'm sure you remember the situation of that woman who was supposed to be stoned and stuff like that. But initially it was to keep law and order, because they had to like subscribe or conform to certain kinds of laws, but it went out of hand. Yeah. So now, background of going back to the book of Kings. The total number of years the kings ruled over Israel, I'll rectify the ground because I did this. Ruled over Israel was 451 years. So the first king, remember, you spoke about something like the temple took about, before they built the temple, was 450. I'm at 480 years. So don't forget those periods. 450, they stayed in Egypt for 430 something years. So most of the things, it's 400 and something. So the kings ruled for over Israel for 451 years, from 1037 BC to 406 BC. Obviously, the first king was King Saul, and the last king was Zedekiah. That was already when the kingdoms were divided. King Saul, the son of Kish, was from the tribe of Benjamin, and he ruled for over 40 years. And the second king, we all know, after God rejected Saul, we know the story. We still want to go deep into that, because I still think that the first three kings, that is Saul, David, and Solomon, we need to deal with them fully. We should not just scrap the surface. So we're gonna deal with them, and afterwards we will choose randomly which kings we need to deal with, because you can't deal with everyone else. But those are the foundation of the first monarchy of Israel. So the second king, we know it was David, the son of Jesse, from the tribe of Judah. He also reigned for 40 years. That is from 1010 BC to 970 BC, which is approximately 40 years too. David succeeded by Solomon, his son, who reigned for 40 years also. But it was about in 930 BC that the United Kingdom split, with the 10 tribes, 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel rejecting Solomon's son, Rehoboam. Oh no, I'm trying to read what St. Colani sent me. That is why
no, General, it's
yes.
okay. Don't mind it. That's for later on. I was just sharing it with you. Go ahead.
No problem, son. Well. So 930 BC, the United Kingdom split. The 10 tribes of Israel rejecting Solomon's son Rehoboam as their king, and they chose Jeroboam from the house, from the tribe of Ephraim, to lead the northern kingdom. Well, this is in a nutshell. It was later, the northern kingdom was later destroyed by the Assyrians, led by Shalmaneser, who took the 10 tribes into exile. The last king of Israel, that is the northern kingdom, by the way, was Hoshea. and it lasted for 208 years all in all. It was ruled by 19 kings from 9 different dynasties. Look, I just want you to note this. Please note this. Unlike the southern kingdom, which was stable and under the house or ruled by the house of David, the northern kingdom was a political disaster. Just like you see how many third world countries are ruled. If a general felt powerful enough, he would dispose the king and become a king, kill the king and the entire household and his entire household. That's why you have 19 dynasties, 9 dynasties, and 19 kings. That's not normal in a kingdom. A kingdom is supposed to be ruled by one household, but that was not the case with the 10 tribes. Immediately after the death of Jeroboam, somebody took over. I forgot who it was. And the typical example was when Jehu took over. Remember, Jehu was an army captain, just like it happens. That's why I say it's a political climate in the biblical times. Elijah sent Elisha to ordain Jehu. They were still in a war. They were in a camp against the Syrians, not Assyrians, Syrians. And then he ordained him. He ran away. And then Jehu took his horse and the followers, and they went to the palace to confront, to dispose the king. And they killed the king, and then he replaced the king. We're still gonna deal with that in depth, but I'm just showing you the turmoil of northern Israel. It was very unstable environment. It reminded me of the Roman Empire after immediately, especially after Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar's reign. It became like that. Those are politics everywhere. It's still happening today, and you find that, I'm sure Africans will remember that Kabila was killed by his bodyguards, and his son replaced him. Something next to that. So whenever you read this book of Kings, especially when you're dealing with the 10 tribes, remember they were just worldly like everyone else, and they just conducted themselves in a way that we modern society can identify with, disposing someone, putting someone they want in power, and when they were tired of that one, kill him, somebody will replace them. That's what happened. The southern kingdom, that is the kingdom of Judah, was the David dynasty. Nobody ever replaced. It was all the rulers were from that household up until they were taken into captivity in Babylon. So the southern kingdom thrived. Remember, I said the kingdom of northern Israel lasted for 208 years, and it was ruled by 19 kings from 19 different dynasties. The southern kingdom of Judah thrived until 587 or 86 BC, when it was overrun by Nebuchadnezzar from Babylon, who carried off many of the inhabitants into exile. That kingdom lasted for 344 years. So I'm sorry, this is not applicable. Let's go to the next slide. I'm sorry I didn't remove this, the last part. Forget it. It was part, yeah, when I was doing the Herodian dynasty the other time. Now, with these 2 slides that you're gonna see, it just shows you all the kings. It's a summary of everything that I was saying about the kingdom of Judah. Judah was ruled by 20 kings, all in all. And you can see from Saul to David, but let's look after the kingdom was divided. Saul, David, and Solomon ruled over a united Israel, but afterwards, how many kings will you count them yourself? There are 20 kings, whether it's from Rehoboam to Zedekiah. You'll read them, and we will choose which king we are going to deal with, because we can't deal with all 20 kings. And Judah was ruled by 20 kings who were the descendants of David. The kingdom lasted for 324 years before going into captivity, into the Babylonian captivity. The first king of the divided kingdom, by the way, because David, Solomon, and Saul were kings when they were, the whole of Israel was still united. So the last king was Zedekiah. Any questions, any queries, anything, anyone who wants to say something? Well, English says silence means content. Then we can move to, if there's no one, even after this, you can still ask and I'll give you the answers if I have them. If I don't, I will just also try and research and come back to you, whether privately or like in an open forum. But for now, yeah. You can go through that list. Yes, don't be quick to go to the next slide. You can just see Rehoboam, Abia. I can tell you the righteous king. Asa, Joshua, Joash partly righteous, but he was at the end when the prophet died, he was no more righteous. And then Jotham. Remember, there was only one woman who ruled over Israel. That was Athaliah, the daughter of Jezebel, who was the son, who was married to Ahaziah. Ahaziah was killed by Jehu when Jehu was killing the king. He was visiting his cousin, and then he got killed. When Athaliah had the news, she killed all the king's sons and then made herself a queen. She ruled for 6 years. That's why she is put there in that list, because that's the only woman monarch to rule over Israel. And then you can see Uzziah, I'm sure you will. Yeah.
I think it will be wise for us to make sure we study her as well. Among the individuals we will look at. I see Saint Tino is excited, so she must be tasked with researching.
No, I will definitely, I want it to be as inclusive as possible. I will definitely give you, I will ask, I want you to look at this so that you should choose the character that you think would be able to present quite well. And you come here, sometimes we'll have 2 people presenting because some of them really didn't do much. It's not gonna take the whole day. Unlike when he's dealing with Solomon, David, and Saul. We will have 2, 3 people presenting. It doesn't have to be long, and then you just stay to have. I will choose randomly, or people will choose. Just think of a king that you want to talk about. I remember the other time we were speaking, King Trustee Majesi said he wants to deal with Hezekiah. And I said, you can't deal with Hezekiah if you're not, you also have to take Ahaz with yourself. You see Ahaz? You need to do that, and you will see why I'm saying that. And whoever is dealing with Josiah, he needs to deal with Manasseh as well. So that you should understand, and you will see why I'm saying that. So there are times when you have to take 2 people at the same time. So these are the kings of Judah, 20 kings. Remember, Judah had 20 kings. They reigned for 344 years. The first king was Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. The last king was Zedekiah. And when you deal with Zedekiah, you need to know the political climate of that particular time. Babylon was a growing empire. He was not even put by the Israelites on that throne. The king that was the official king of Judah went into captivity. It was Joachim, and Nebuchadnezzar put his puppet. I'm sure you've heard about such things in history. Put his puppet on the throne. Zedekiah was that puppet. Zedekiah later on rose up against his master, and that's when Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon invaded or attacked Judah twice. The first time during the time of Joachim, the second time during the time of Zedekiah. Well, that's when Nebuchadnezzar was angry because he tried to stab him in the back by trying to make an alliance, secret alliance with Egypt. Now, Nebuchadnezzar came for Zedekiah, killed his royal family, even banned the temple, something that he never did in the beginning. So you will make you understand all of those things so that you should understand your Bible properly. Yes, these are the 19 kings of Israel. And you will see 10 tribes broke away from the house of David, ruled by Rehoboam. So Jeroboam from the tribe of Ephraim became their first king. The kingdom lasted for 208 years. The last king was Hoshea. And it was during his reign that the Assyrians under Shalmaneser. Please familiarize yourself with this because those are the kind of questions I like posing in during the Sabbath school quiz on our cyber QC. It was under Shalmaneser that the 10 tribes were conquered. Remember, if you read the book of 2 Kings chapter 17, that's when the 10 tribes were totally destroyed. They were totally destroyed. To this day, we don't know what happened to them. God did away with them. And that book stated clearly as to what happened to the 10 tribes, that God did away with them. So 19 kings from 9 dynasties ruled this kingdom. Any questions? Oh, that's one thing I forgot to include. The capital city of the southern kingdom was Jerusalem, because it was the city of David. And the capital city of the northern kingdom of the 10 tribes was Samaria. I'm sure you always, and I'm going to explain a little bit as to why you even hear in the New Testament, they always say Jews and Samaritans didn't see eye to eye. So what happened? During the time after Shalmaneser the Assyrians took the Israelites into captivity, the Israelites, remember, according to the Torah, were supposed to be a pure nation. They were not supposed to intermarry with the pagans. But unfortunately, this is what happened. They intermarried. They were taken to far away lands, away from their territory, and they subsequently got mixed with other people, even though they tried to keep their identity. But because they were regarded to be, or the descendants were impure, or of they were treated differently. That's where the terminology Samaritans came into existence. They could no longer be called the Israelites. They were named after their capital city, Samaria, which was founded by King Omri. According to history, they call him Omri the Great, the father of Ahab. He founded the capital city, Samaria. So they were called the Samaritans now. No more Jews, no more children of Israel, because they were, I will call it the way it is, they were bastard nation. Bastard is not necessarily a derogatory way, an expletive word, but it's more of a derogatory word. It means something of a lower value. So that's how they were treated. So Jews didn't want to mix with them because they were impure. Yes, they knew quite well these are our cousins, but because they broke away from God's covenant, they treated them like the children of a lesser God. Let me just put it that way. That is why you were not, Deacon Zumo loves explaining this. A Jew was not even supposed to pass through the land of northern Israel and come across and mix up with the Samaritans, who were regarded to be of lower status. Hence, that woman was so shocked when Jesus approached him and wanted to use to get water from him, and said, "You know that Jews and Samaritans don't see eye to eye. Why would you want me to help you, to give you water?" And that is where the history comes from. Their brothers decided to shun them because they were mixed with other nationalities, and the etymology of the word Samaritan, or the history behind it, is because of their capital city. The northern capital city was Samaria. So yeah, that's the end of it. Any questions? So obviously we share the lessons all the time, and if you want a copy of this to remind yourself, you can have it. It's not necessarily the property of Mr. Njanga or Saint Sfiso. It's the property of Church of God and Saints of Christ, and I would be glad to share it with whoever wants.